Go ahead.
Welcome to the class of 2021 College Essay Writing Seminar. My name is Mrs. Ottenberg, and on behalf of the Potomac Falls High School Counseling Office, I encourage you to listen and read this presentation thoughtfully. I would like to thank Ms. Jens and Mr. Walker. Their collaboration while planning this seminar has been invaluable, and as a result, we are able to create a strong and informative program that supports our senior class every August. The college application essay is an essential piece to your application. It provides the reader with insight into who you really are, other than what they read on your application and high school transcript. Since SATs and ACTs may be optional at the college or colleges you are applying to this admission season, it is even more important that you create a strong essay or personal statement on your applications. If you have not reached out to a teacher in connection with writing a letter of recommendation, please do that now as well. Send them an email and attach your student resume. You can find a template for your student resume in Naviance. You can format the resume any way you choose in Naviance. The English department at Potomac Falls High School is amazing. Year after year, they support our seniors in preparing college essays in class and individually. Your school counselors will work with you during the college admissions process as well. You will hear from your school counselor in the near future to discuss your college plan. And of course, I am with you all the way should you have any questions or need support through your college planning process. Simply send me an email. I'm happy to help. So take a deep breath and get excited. The college application process is a whirlwind. Please don't let it stress you out. You'll do just fine. In closing, college visits will be virtual this year. So please check Naviance and your LCPS email several times a week. College visits will take place every hour on Mondays from 4 to 6 p.m. Tuesday through Thursday. No college visits will take place on Fridays. I also strongly suggest that you follow PF announcements on Twitter and Instagram and PFHS Counseling on Twitter. This is how we push out valuable information to students and parents, our community members as well. It is especially important for seniors to stay on top of the information that the school sends out regarding the college admissions and planning process, as well as financial aid. You cannot miss deadline dates. They are not issued by the high schools, they are issued by colleges and the federal student loan program. You miss a deadline date, there is nothing we can do about it. Now I am going to turn the program over to Ms. Jens and Mr. Walker. I look forward to working with all of you this year. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jeannie Jens, and I teach English at Potomac Falls High School. This year I'll be teaching dual enrollment literature and public speaking. And I've worked with seniors and rising seniors on their college essay for at least 10 years now. And so what we'll share with you today is a lot of our collective experience along with our former students who have generously allowed us to share their essays with you. So we have a lot of great resources for you today and a lot of, again, collective knowledge of what we've gained over the years of helping students and studying this process. Mr. Walker, would you like to introduce yourself? You're on mute, Mr. Walker.
Is that a problem if I'm on mute? Anyway, I'm Mr. Walker, and I've taught at Potomac Falls now for 19 years, and I've worked with seniors on writing college essays for many of those. I teach AP Seminar, I teach AP Language, and I teach Philosophy, which are all writing-based courses. And writing and submitting a college admissions essay that is effective for your audience is essential to your success with your application. And so pay close attention to what we have to say, and find a person who you trust to read your essay and follow this advice, and you're going to meet success. All right, let's get started.
All right. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to talk about is where you will be able to find the resources that we'll be sharing with you today. If you go to the Potomac Falls website, which I don't suggest you do right this minute, I would suggest you watch this and then go look for this later. But what you'll see is if you scroll down to where it says news from our school, there is a box that says how to write the college admissions essay. You'll click there and it will take you to a list of advice that Mr. Walker and I will be talking about today, and then sample essays, which is our favorite part to be able to share our students' writing with you. And the sample essays, the ones we will talk about today, are from our former students that graduated from Potomac Falls. But we also have links to UVA and Johns Hopkins and a few other colleges that put out advice on how to write this essay, and they include sample essays that students submitted to them. We strongly encourage you to look through this packet. And again, we will be highlighting little excerpts of essays that were from Potomac Falls students, but please look through this packet and you will see a whole list of advice, everything that we put together for you that we think would be helpful for you in this process. I'll turn this over to Mr. Walker. We have some advice from writers for writers to start off our presentation with.
Okay, so the first piece of advice is I write to find what I have to say. I edit to figure out how to say it right. This gets to this idea of that writing is a process. Writing is a process of discovery, and to find out what many of us have to write in order to find out what we're thinking, what we have to say, and get that right down on a number of first drafts, and then move into the editing process then to how to say it better, all right, and how to say it right, all in consideration of the audience that you're writing for and the purpose for which you are writing. Second one is very much like the first one, and it gets to this idea of audience. And remember, you've got to keep your audience in mind when you are writing, and keep the purpose in mind when you are writing. So the first draft is for the writer. That's for you to get your ideas down on the page. And this can be first draft, remember, is multiple times sitting down to write. Second draft is for the editor. This is the idea that you need to find someone that you trust to read your writing, to read it and read it from and understand what your writing situation is. And then when you write your third draft, and keep in mind for the reader, it might turn out to be the sixth or seventh draft, and you're ultimately composing for an audience for a specific purpose.
Thank you. And just to add on to that, my students always worry a lot of times about who they're writing for. You know, they think that they have to write this very polished, perfect, beautiful essay about themselves being perfect and polished and beautiful. And that is not the case. As you'll see with a lot of our sample essays, these students are, yes, their final draft is often polished and beautiful. And that's because they've worked on it for draft after draft after draft. They've gone to Mr. Walker or their English teacher or their best friend, and they have asked for editing advice. So what you will see today is a polished final draft, but the people writing it are writing about themselves in a way that is very honest and real. So don't think, if you can force yourself to sit down and not think about the college at first. Think about yourself and what you want to say about yourself, and then move on into your editing. So a little bit more advice from writers for writers is the first one's about storytelling. To write, you have to have stories you want to tell. You have to keep your mind alive, and you have to work hard. And I'd like to focus in on the storytelling aspect of this. You all have a story. You all have many stories to tell about your life. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you've lived through some, huge event. College admissions counselors know that some of you guys have lived fairly, ordinary lives. You've had, great moments in your life, and you've had low moments in your life. They are not expecting you to write about these grand experiences. Your stories are important, and they make up who you are. If you think about what you do when you get together with friends, maybe that you haven't seen in a while, or family that you haven't seen in a while, you a lot of times will share stories about, what's happened in your life, or stories that you guys remember together. And it's just the way that we bond. It's part of our humanity, this storytelling aspect. So you're going to see some stories today, and colleges like to see stories. If they didn't want to see a story, they could just read your resume. They could see that you've been involved in band and, all of these clubs and activities. That's not what they're looking for. They want to see a piece of who you are, and stories are the gateway to that. So, and there's just something intrinsic in us as humans that we love stories. And then the second one has to do with how you write it. And again, this gets to maybe your second or third or fourth draft. But I like this because we'll talk a little bit today about showing versus telling. So this one, C.S. Lewis says, don't say it was delightful. Make us say delightful when we've read the description. You see, all those words, horrifying, wonderful, hideous, exquisite, are only like saying to your readers, please, will you do the job for me? And this really gets into showing versus telling, particularly when you are giving us a story. We want to feel like we're there in that story. We want to be immersed in it. And you'll see some examples of students doing this today with their storytelling. So then that leads us to what for some students becomes like an existential crisis. Who am I? How do I put that on paper? And how do I make the colleges want me, this essay something. So this is about a personal statement, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference between a personal statement and the college essay. But this just gets to this idea that you're going to have to think a little bit about what you want to write. Sometimes you want to write several different essays, or at least the little snippets of them, and then kind of see which one works the best for you. My students always laugh at me when I say this, but I think of college admissions as almost kind of like asking someone out on a date. You have to put yourself out there. You have to take a risk, and they may say yes and they may say no, but it's really important because this is a relationship between you and the college, right? Like, you want to find a school that's good for you, and they want to find students that will be good fits on their campuses. So you do have to share a little bit, and you do have to think a little about who you are as a person and how you want to share that. If you have a great sense of humor, maybe you want to write an essay that's a little bit funny. If you are more serious and contemplative, then maybe you want to pull that aside, pull that out in the essay. So we understand this is not an easy process. And in fact, what we did is we reached out to students on our social media, and we asked them to submit questions for this seminar, because we aren't doing this seminar obviously we typically do it in person with students sitting in front of us, and they're able to ask questions. So we elicited questions this way, and this is kind of the biggest question that a lot of students have. If you haven't looked into this process yet, if you haven't read sample essays, this is a very reasonable question to ask. How do I start the essay? What do I say in it, right? So we think today, by showing you these examples and giving you a few tips, you should have lots of ideas sparking in your head. We encourage you to take quick notes. Find an essay that you love. You love the way that essay is written, or you love what the student wrote about, and then use that as inspiration. Writers are often inspired by other writers. You read something, it sparks an idea in you, and you go write. And that kind of reciprocal relationship is what we hope to encourage today as you see what our students have done before. And we hope that by the end of this, you will have more than enough answers to the question on the screen. Okay, so we're going to run through these really quickly before we get into our sample essays. This is a list of tips. You will see this on the packet that I encourage you to go to the Potomac Falls website to look at. I'm going to run through these quickly. We will talk about these more in detail as we hit these essays. Plan before you write. Your first draft is free writing. So what that means is just sit down and let the words flow. I mean, sometimes my students are writing and they're like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. Don't worry about it. Just get it on the page. And it's what you write and how you write it. So, your topic does matter, but I would argue that how you write about that topic matters even more. You'll see some essays that aren't about big, extraordinary events. They're just about a moment, a simple moment in a student's life. And so how you write it becomes really important, because that's how your personality comes out. Write one essay at a time. Now, that's kind of a personal choice. Again, if you want to write little snippets and then turn and write another one, but when it gets to like polishing that essay and really fine-tuning that essay, I would try to focus on one at a time. You need to give your full attention to one. Have a conversation on the page. You'll see what we mean by that when we show you, but it should feel kind of like you're talking to your reader, not this very polished formal writing that you might do in some of your English classes where you write in a very formal tone. This should feel a little bit more conversational. Don't write from a distance. What that means is, and it goes along with number 7, which is to make it personal. Even if you are writing about, like, let's say a philosophical idea that you find interesting, you have to put yourself in it. You cannot take this like distant view where you talk about, you're really interested in, some scientific method, and you never put yourself into that. You have to insert yourself into this. The colleges don't want to learn about that scientific method. They want to learn about you. So you have to find that way to make it personal. And some of you are more comfortable with writing about yourself than others, but you'll see examples of how some students did this in a way that's very fitted to their personality. And then I'll turn it over to Mr. Walker to run through the rest of these.
Okay, thank you. So number 8, be ready to write lots of drafts. So think of the writing process as not linear, where you're going to sit down and you're going to write, and then you're going to let somebody read it, and then you're going to rewrite, and then you're going to edit it, and then it's going to be finished. It doesn't work that way. It's a recursive idea where you are writing and rewriting and reading and sharing, and then rewriting those parts of the essay that you've got to get right before you move on to another section of the essay. So you have to be ready to write and rewrite and rewrite. Some of you are going to find lightning in a bottle, and you're going to write an essay and you're going to have it done in 1 or 2 drafts. Others of you are going to write, and it's going to be 4 to 6. Some of you will go even up into double digits on your drafts. And you know what? That work is hard, but it's worth it. Consider what you're writing for. Consider your purpose. It's worth it. Know when to leave well enough alone. Consider your writing situation. Consider your application. Consider your qualifications for the school to which you're applying. And when that essay and someone looks at you and says, okay, I think we've got this, I think you have it, then you're done. You're finished. Learn how to drop it and move on to the next thing. When you're finished, because you have a lot to do in this process. Find a place to write where you can concentrate on your writing. Show and tell. So these essays, many of them, well, they're all personal in a way, and they're all encouraging you to write an essay in which you show your identity, that you show your voice, but you're also at some point going to have to tell what the lesson from these experiences that you've had are, and you're going to directly tell what the purpose, what the reason is that you're writing it, or you're going to tell how you grew from the experience and it changed your identity and the way you think about the world. So you're going to do both, all right? So you'll see how this works. Most of the good essays have a lot of showing, and then you'll see where the telling occurs most of the time at the end. Go beyond the obvious. You have to see meaning in people, places, and things. This goes into the way you think about something. This goes into your style choices, your structure choices, and seeing meaning in these things that you interact with and you transact with every single day. And 13, proofread before you send. Let another person proofread your work before you send it in. That's very, very important in order to get things right, because there are expectations and standards that you have to meet with regard to style choices and language that your reader needs to understand in your situation.
All right, so we're going to roll quickly through some of the common app prompts. We know a lot of you guys might be doing multiple applications. Keep in mind that some schools ask for a common app essay, and then they ask for supplementals. So pay close attention. You'll need to get in there and start looking at applications, logging in, setting up your common app account, looking at the school and what they require. Just pay close attention because every school does it a little bit differently. But we'll talk quickly about these common app prompts. The first one is some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. And again, that for some of you might mean that you have this really interesting talent or background or identity that you feel like you just need to share, but that doesn't mean that you have to be different from everyone else, right? A lot of my students kind of freak out when they hear the word unique, like they think, how am I supposed to be unique and different from everybody else? It's not it. But if there's just something about you that you really want to share, notice the word story at the end of that prompt. Share your story. Don't just tell us who you are, try to show us who you are, and you'll see examples of that soon. The second one I really like because it's really kind of about failure or setbacks, and we've all had those. And a lot of times you can learn about yourself through how you respond to setbacks and how you respond to failure. The lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? Doesn't mean everything ended up rosy and beautiful and perfect, but it does mean that you gained something from that experience. What did you learn about yourself, how to do something differently next time, or how you were able to work through that struggle? And so I will say this probably a couple of times today, and Mrs. Ottenberg is very big on this as well. You don't necessarily have to write about a positive experience, but you do need to end on a positive note. You don't want your reader to end that essay thinking, well, they failed at this and then it was really bad for them, and then that's it, right? We have to find a way to take something that was difficult for you, or if you're going to write about something that was painful for you, and then when you pull out and start to tell, as Mr. Walker talked about a minute ago, when you start to tell, that's where you get to kind of explore a little bit about how you gain strength from this. So think about that one. I really like that essay prompt, and then I'll turn these over to Mr. Walker.
All right, so before I get into my two, when we go into these sample essays and read them and discuss them, one good idea is to read these essays and then look back at these prompts and match the essay to the prompt. Which question does this answer? It appears that they're writing about this, and this is how they've addressed this question. So reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? Okay, so these two prompts on this page allow those of you who don't necessarily want to write a completely dedicated first-person narrative in which you tell all of these stories about your experiences and what you learned and how you grew. Now, understand the result of these two, your essays that you write based off these two prompts need to show what you learned and how you grew and how you matured and how you see different things about the world. But notice what they're inviting you to do. They're inviting you to challenge, to talk about something that maybe is more external to you, that you're going to address a belief or an idea that is compelling to you and one that you've lived or you've been exposed to in your life, and that at some point you've questioned it or challenged it. It is not saying that you had to have overturned your world, right, in a drastic way. If you've done that, write about it. The key words in here are where questioned or challenged. And you know what? You might have done this questioning or challenging just in your head, because it might be too much of a risk to question or challenge a belief. Or you might have gone ahead and done this. So you take control of these prompts and you say and what you want to say about it. By the way, there's a story in this and you have to tell it, all right? It just might not be like a full narrative. Describe a problem you've solved or a problem you'd like to solve. It can be an intellectual challenge, a research query is a question, an ethical dilemma, anything that is of personal importance, no matter the scale. Explain its significance to you and what steps you took or could be taken to identify a solution. Notice what it says in there. Anything that is of personal importance. It is your choice. It is your intellectual challenge. It is your question that you want to know more about the world with your research. Maybe there is an ethical dilemma where there's a choice you had to make, and the impacts that you had were going to be pretty strong for multiple people through a multi-perspective way to think. So again, it gets back to you. And what did you do? What action did you take? Or what can be done to identify a solution? Notice it's a proposal. What can be done to solve this problem? So again, this is deeply connected to you, but it's also a problem in the world that you are interested in discussing, and maybe that's going to guide you in the next 4 years with where you go to school. So again, this is a little more external. It gets you away from kind of the deeply personal, but it still has to be personal. It still has to reveal you. All right. So next one.
Okay, so the last few on Common App: discuss an accomplishment, event, realization that sparked a period of personal growth or new understanding of yourself or others. I honestly think of this as kind of similar to the obstacle one. It's just that maybe you're focusing more on the accomplishment or event. And a lot of times you might have also struggled through that. Some of these prompts really do overlap. So just something where you feel like you grew. Looking back at this time, you feel like this really kind of pushed you to that kind of next stage in your developmental process. The next one: discuss a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? And again, this is a little bit like the ones Mr. Walker just talked about, where you get to pull away sometimes from the super personal, but you still have to put yourself in it. You know, what is it that entrances you about this idea, topic, concept? And so that's a little bit more of kind of that maybe philosophical take on that. And then finally, I mean, this is an open topic, and this is a little bit more like what a personal statement might be, right? So some colleges ask for a personal statement, and then that is kind of this open place for you to write about what you want to write about. Some students will use the personal statement as a place to talk about something that they want to explain on their resume, right? So they had a really bad sophomore year, and that's because something happened in their lives at that point that they were struggling with. And so if you look at their transcript, you see a dip in sophomore year, and then you see that student sort of kind of climbing out of that. This might be a good place to explain that. You're still going to tell a story, you're still going to share who you are, but this might be a way for you to kind of talk a bit about, you know, if you have dedicated yourself to working part-time while also being a full-time student, and you don't have a lot of extracurriculars, maybe you talk about your experience at work and what you gained from that. Because again, you know, they do look for those things. They look for extracurriculars, but they understand that the student is a whole person. And sometimes you have things that you have obligations, you know, you have problems, you have things in your life that you have to dedicate yourself to. So with the Common App, they give you a 650 word limit. So, you know, what a lot of my students do is they overwrite and then we scale back, or they, you know, that doesn't mean you have to go up to 650. It used to be 500. Some of my students hit that 500 to 600 mark and they're good to go. Don't feel like if you don't get all the way up to that 650, you know, your essay isn't as good. But if you go over, what I would suggest you do is ask somebody to go through and just brutally edit. What I ask my students to do is go through and highlight what you absolutely must keep. What is it that you have to keep? And then let's figure out a way to cut that other stuff out or shorten it down. Sometimes you have to condense a little bit, because you can get really, those of you who like creative writing, you can get really caught up in the showing, and showing takes more words, and then you run out of space. So you have to really be kind of, you have to think about that, but that's something that can happen in the editing process. Okay, coalition is very similar. So we're going to spend like 2 minutes on this, and then we're going to get to some really good sample essays. Mr. Walker, do you want to take this?
Okay, so number one is notice the way that they phrase their effect parts of this of these statements. They just phrase them differently. Describe an experience that either demonstrates your character or help to shape it. Now, character, it doesn't have to go into morality. It's just who you are. It's your identity. What shaped your identity? It can include morals, but that's, you know, that's the way you go. You know, it's number two, a meaningful contribution to others. Now, this differentiates from the Common App. This is a service idea. And what have you done to help others in the world, and the greater good was your focus. So it's a very, very targeted idea here. Those of you who have done volunteer work or you've gone on trips where they're service trips, this one, discuss the challenges and rewards of making your contribution. Again, what are the challenges? How was it difficult? What did you learn? And what did you get out of this? Now, if you look at this topic certainly fits into a Common App prompt also. Just match the two to see what they fit, how they fit. Has there been a time when you've had a long cherished or accepted belief challenged? How did you respond? We've talked about this one. All right, this is basically the same.
And then this one is a little different on the coalition. What is the hardest part of being a student now? What's the best part? What advice would you give to a younger sibling or friend? I've had students even write it as like a letter to the younger generation or a letter to their younger sibling. And they have this kind of creative way of doing this. And I think if you have, thoughts about that and you want to do it that way, again, we're going to talk about taking risk in a little bit. And, the way you format your essay sometimes can be a risk. I've had students who write little snippets of stories, and then the next story is a next time in their life, and the next story is a next time in their life, and then they pull it all together in this beautiful way. So, the idea is that and when you look at this advice, when you go to our packet and you click on those links and you go to UVA site or Johns Hopkins site, one of the things they will tell you is don't be formulaic. There is no formula to this. You'll see patterns in the way students write about it, and a lot of students kind of follow some similar patterns, but we can't give you, a formula like the 5-paragraph essay and say, this is how you write it. You have to kind of find your own way. What is your topic and how do you want to write about it? And then essay on the topic of your choice, again, wide open. What do you want to write about? How do you want to write it? They have a recommended length of 500 to 550 words, so a little bit shorter than the Common App. I believe what that means is you can go over, but I would not go over very much. I would be very, very careful about that. Mrs. Ottenberg, would you agree about that? Okay. When they recommend something, that means they don't want it much over that, but they are asking you to write close to 500 words around there. Okay. All right, so we're going to get into our sample essays now. And we had a student question, which is what are ideas for things you should write about if they don't give you a prompt? So if it's personal statement, if it's, write about anything you want to write about, you'll see ideas as we get through this. The first essay that I'm going to share from you, almost every essay that we have are Potomac Falls former students or alumni, people who've graduated, except for this first one. This first one is my nephew, and he is now in graduate school, but he shared his college admission essay when he was a senior, just like you guys in high school. And I asked him if I could share it because I love him dearly. And he loves to write. And by the way, he is looking at medical school at this point. And so when you look at this essay, you don't necessarily see that in the essay. And that's because Timothy wasn't sure yet what he wanted to do. But what he started to do is just look around his room. He was sitting in his room thinking, what do I write? What do I write? I don't know what to write. But Timothy loves to read. He always has. And so he started looking at his bookshelf, and the beginning of the essay, which I won't show you this right now. You can see it when you go find it, when you go look at our packet. In the beginning of the essay, he imagines a stranger walking into his room and looking around and thinking, what can I learn about this person just from their bedroom? And then what I'm going to show you right now is kind of the middle part of his essay where he wonders what the stranger might think of him. And so again, when you try to think of what do I write about, start with the ordinary, start with the things that are right in front of you, start about the things or the people or the places that you love that kind of give you joy, that show a little bit about who you are. All right, so here's my nephew, Timothy, who is not a Potomac Falls graduate. This is his middle of his essay. Would the stranger seek to find out more by the paper strewn across my desk? Cards from loved ones congratulating me and my hospital volunteer card lay next to a copy of A Brief History of Time. Truck keys below a Led Zeppelin album glint in the fluorescent light. Above, a billboard pinned with memories holds pictures of my young self with my family at Disney World. Aunts and uncles hold me and my sister close, and the only detention slip I've ever received hangs comically beside them. And that's one of my favorite lines because it's a lot of things in his room. And then he has kind of a funny story about that detention slip. He's not a kid, he's a rule follower. He's not a kid who got in a lot of trouble, but he had that one time. And so again, they're not expecting perfect students. And I like that little piece of his personality there. Okay, next paragraph. If the stranger were intelligent, he would return to the bookshelf where my favorite novels lean against one another. Frodo Baggins sits next to John Grisham, and David McCullough listens avidly to Jack London recite Tales of the Wild. They lean almost lazily until the end of the bookshelf where a compilation of the works of Charles Dickens and a monstrous calculus prep book stand upright as soldiers. And then the next paragraph, this is part of the end of his, or more of the middle of his essay. One may ask, how are the objects in the seemingly random assortment connected? The answer is easy. They are all connected through me. These objects all represent who I am. To the passive observer, these objects are random with little value. To me, they are my life. They are what would be left behind if I were to vanish from the face of the earth. In a sense, they are part of my legacy. When I was young, my dad would read to me from Lord of the Rings. Hardly childhood reading, I know, but as my fellow Tolkien scholars know, Tolkien read many of his stories to his young son, Christopher, as bedtime stories. It was passed down from father to son. Not the books. This goes beyond the tangible. It was the experience that became the legacy. If I were a betting man, I would be willing to say that Christopher in his later years may not remember the name of every chapter of every book Tolkien wrote, but he does remember this, his father's voice breathing life into the triumphs of heroes from a faraway land. And that gets into storytelling on multiple levels, right? Timothy is telling his story, but he's also talking about how stories have shaped him and affected him through his father's reading to him. And my brother did this from a very young age with Timothy. They read all of these novels and all of these stories together. And I just love how he puts all of that together on the page by, just starting by looking around his room and finding those kind of meaning in objects and kind of ordinary things, and seeing how that shaped him. Okay, the next essay is a very different vibe. This student is kind of an adrenaline junkie, which she'll talk about. Her opening paragraph is just her taking a dare. Her friends dared her to do a weird yoga position. She did it. She fell on her face, right? And so not a big moment in her life, but she did some showing. And now I want you to notice how she moves into telling here, where she tells us who she is, very strongly tells us who she is. And she mixes in a few little showing details, what we might call imagery. She kind of sprinkles those throughout. She does a beautiful job with this. So this is the middle of her essay, or I guess the end of her essay. If I could, I would skydive every day of my life. I would bungee jump off the tallest building, race cars like you see in Fast and Furious movies. I have my limits, but when it comes to adrenaline, not very many. I want to feel my blood rushing from my toes to my head, to feel my eyes water as the air smacks me in the face. I want to feel alive. Why do we wait till we're on our deathbed to be spontaneous? It wouldn't hurt to take a risk once in a while. No matter how much my mother warns me, no matter how much she tries to keep my feet on the ground, I will see the world one day. I will go beyond my limits. What can I say? I'm a risk taker. And I love that because she is very strong in stating who she is. This is who I am. Now, this essay is not who I am, but I love it because it states who she is. And so that telling in this paragraph is particularly strong. Okay. The next one is we have a student question, actually 2 student questions. And Mr. Walker, I'm going to ask if you would take these, because I really like how we talked about this the other day. And this has to do with kind of how you write the essay as far as the formal versus informal tone.
Okay, so the first question, if our writing tone is more formal than casual, is it okay to write like that in the essay? Would admission officers be more hesitant towards it? Okay, so the idea here is that it is this is a pretty serious formal writing experience, but you're writing to get into college. But tone and content are very, very related. So the content is going to determine your tone. And so if your tone is conversational, if your tone fits what somebody, how someone speaks, then you're going to have a casual tone to it, right? But if you're writing about something that is more serious with regard to this, then you have to write with a serious tone. And it's just a matter of how you are going to fit what you are going to say to the way that you want to say it, always with your audience in mind, to be persuasive. And to remember, what you're trying to do here is persuade the admissions officer to say, this is who we want to invite to our campus to study for the next 4 years. And so there are multiple answers to this question, but I don't think you're going to anticipate here, would they be more hesitant towards it? I just think you have to be appropriate with regard to your content and your tone and fit that into what your topic and your content is about. With essays with word limits, can I use contractions to save on word space, or is it more appropriate to avoid them, or does it even matter? Okay, so my answer to this is, again, if it is a more casual, kind of informal topic that you are writing about, then maybe a contraction fits into this. But remember, the use of contractions needs to fit your particular writing style with regard to a style choice to reveal your identity, more than it does with regard to saving on something purposeful or like practical, like word space. So my answer to this is, if you're trying to decide about whether or not to use a contraction with word space, I would recommend looking at how you've written other things to fit that word count more than being concerned about a contraction. If it's academic in nature about what you're writing, then I would say don't use a contraction. But if you're telling a story and it fits into the style, content, and your choices, then use a contraction. I mean, that's a good question. It's a very, very narrow style question, but it does matter, but it matters first to the choices that you're making in revealing your identity through your writing.
Okay, thank you. So as we get into the next example, this is more of a student wanting to write about something that she had gone through with her family that was very difficult for her and her family. And I can still picture her. This was years ago, probably 10 years ago or more, that she came to me as a student and said, I want to write about my brother. It's a difficult relationship. I don't know how to write about it. And one thing that Mr. Walker has talked about before that I really like the way he phrased this is that this essay is not a diary entry. And what that means is if you are going through something difficult in your life right now, writing about that thing that you are currently experiencing is often not the best way to go about it, because you are in it. What you want to do with these essays is you want to talk about something and then take a broader view of it. Like, looking back on that day now, I realize this, right? We need time to reflect and grow and learn from our experiences. If we're in the thick of it and we're in the middle of a problem, it's often hard to write about that without it sounding like you're just kind of like, throwing emotions out on the page. However, this student is a beautiful writer, as you'll see, and this essay helped her figure out how she was going to deal with this situation. And it's one of those kind of, except for every rule, there's an exception. She was going through it at the moment, and yet she found a way to write about it that gave some reflection and how she was able to kind of manage this problem in her life. So the beginning of the essay describes the problem. It really shows the problems with her brother. My student who wrote this essay, straight A student, almost never got in trouble, was just kind of did everything that was asked of her kind of person. And her brother was really the opposite. He got in a lot of trouble. His grades were not great, and the whole family was worried about him. And there was a lot of fighting in the house that kind of centered around that, but also her sense of kind of guilt for being the good kid versus her brother who was not. And so she was really struggling with, she really wanted to write about it. And she did so beautifully. So this is her probably middle of her essay and then working to the end. So this is the middle and end of her essay. Today is no different. More yelling, more angry door slamming, more crying. After consoling my mother, seeing my father's graying hair and sunken eyes, I fled to the peace of a quiet car. Just like every other day, I turned to leave. He is there waiting for his bus. And this is her brother. He was framed by the beginnings of fall. Leaves were changing. A cold wind ruffled his dirty blonde hair. His big brown eyes looked too empty. Finally, it clicked. I saw our lives in lines, no more cycles. There was only one answer all along, but I could never see it. It was autumn, and I couldn't change that. I couldn't fix the dead leaves falling. I couldn't make the wind stop blowing. Couldn't make it warmer or colder. Just like I couldn't fix him, no matter how hard I or anyone else tried. Still, it was more comforting knowing all I could do was love him with my whole heart until both of us weren't so broken anymore. I can love him without hating his lack of empathy. I can end the cycle of blame and start our relationship over. And that's the end. And again, this is a beautiful writer who notices the world around her and writes about it in a very poetic way. But a few things that I really like about this is, I'll call your attention to one little part where she says, seeing my father's graying hair and sunken eyes. That is a great way of showing the effect that this has had on her father. Instead of just telling, instead of just saying my father was really stressed out and worried, she shows us that in a very concise and beautiful way, right? I can picture his face from that, and I don't even know her father. Same thing she does with her brother and the way that she pictured him in that moment, the way she saw him in that moment. And she's using kind of the setting as symbolism here, which is something that a lot of writers do. And she moves into this kind of positive ending. Now, earlier I mentioned that you can write about something difficult in your life, but you need to end on a positive note. And she does that here. You still see the pain in her at the end of that essay, but there is hope at the end of that. There is this beautiful ending where she sees promise for their future. So again, when I say your ending has to be positive, it doesn't mean it has to be like beautiful, perfect, everything ended up exactly right? But there has to be this kind of hopeful or uplifting message at the end of it. And this student really was able to do that in such a beautiful way. The next one also is a fairly serious tone, and you'll see a mix of essays today. Some of them are funny in kind of a bizarre way, and that fits that student's personality, and some of them are more serious. And so I'm going to show you another serious one from a former student. And the essay that I'm about to show you, she was inspired by a paragraph from the novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I was teaching her at the time. And there's a paragraph where the narrator describes a character's hands. And the entire paragraph is just about this man's hands and how it kind of reflects his life. And she was really inspired by that and thought about her own father and what his hands look like and why that matters. And so you'll see how she did that. And if I had more time with you today, I'd show you the original paragraph in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but just know that she was inspired by a work of literature. This is her opening paragraph. Scars lined the skin on his knuckles. His palms were cracked and calloused. They tugged on my t-shirts when he'd pat me on the back. The creases and healed blisters told the stories of his past, a testament to the physical labor he had endured. They mesmerized me. I smiled, remembering the apologetic look he would give me when I reached for them while we walked together. I was so proud of those hands. They had come to this country empty in the pursuit of the American dream. Those hands chased the monsters out from under my bed and killed spiders that lurked in the corners of my room. Now I saw holding these hands in mine, their desperate grip so tight that I could almost feel our pulses sinking. Thump, thump, ice fishing. Thump, thump, learning to ride a bike. Thump, thump, dancing on his feet around our living room. The flashbacks inundated me. My daddy and cancer simply did not agree with each other. And that last line is, of course, the reveal, right? Why is she writing about her dad's hands? Why, this essay could have gone a lot of different ways. It could have just gone into her relationship with her father, but she's holding his hands in the hospital room and looking at them, and that's why. So what you'll see sometimes with opening paragraphs is you're not really even sure where the writer is and what's going on, and that's kind of slowly revealed as we get towards the end of that paragraph. And I think she does a beautiful job with that. And again, that last sentence is telling, but it's telling in a very, powerful way, right? So in the middle of the essay, she talks a bit about, how she had to kind of adapt her life to this with her dad being in the hospital and how some of the things that her family went through. And then I want to show you the last paragraph of her essay now as well. I look back. This is what a lot of students do. They give us a showing story and then they take a step back and say, I look back. This is a really good way to kind of think about how you might structure your essay. I look back on that first day I visited my father in the hospital as one of the most difficult I have ever lived. However, watching as he deteriorated, something inside of me began to grow. I learned to cook, clean, and manage my time, as well as a household. I got a job to ease some burdens and graciously wrote explanatory emails to family and friends throughout the course of the treatment. But more importantly, I learned to unify a family in shambles. I learned the immense power of prayer. I learned to see the glass as half full, even when there is no more than a few drops inside. It was in being torn down and having to rebuild myself that I learned about strength. My actions earned me the right to respect myself. It was a lesson in the fragility of life that taught me the tenacity of hope and the human spirit. And again, this is a beautiful, polished final draft, right? So some of the vocab you see at the end might have come through some of those editing things. She's a beautiful writer. But I love this essay because I think that some students have a hard time writing about their strengths and talking about themselves in a way that is kind of like a brag, right? And this student does this in a way that I think is very powerful and very real, right? What did she gain from this awful experience with her father being sick? She learned how strong she was because she stepped up and helped in a way. And these are kind of these life lessons that she pulled from this. And that is, I think, again, very important. You can write about, and if I go back a little bit, actually, the topic of this slide is death, divorce, disease, and disaster, right? It's the 4 Ds. You can write about those things, but you have to find a way to pull something positive out of it at the end. And the student does a really good job with that. And then let's see. Along those lines, another student asked, how do you avoid making your essay cliche, right? And if I back up one, I've got, this idea that what did I learn from my father's sickness? I learned that I'm strong and that, I have hope now. That could be written in a way that's very cliche, right? I could use actual cliches in the ending of that and it would lose its power. So I ask my students to kind of go through and look for those phrases in their writing. Are there any phrases that someone else could have written that we could just pull out of this essay and plop into another essay or into another conversation, and it just kind of fits there naturally? The best way to avoid being cliche is just to try to write about something that's really important to you. And then during the editing process, you can look for those. I think that a lot of people are going to write about similar topics, and that's okay. But you have a story to tell that only you can tell. Right? Only you can tell your story. Even if you're writing about a story that your friend was a part of, if your friend wrote that story about that same event, they would write it differently. So it's what you write, but also how you write it that can help you avoid those cliches. And again, use these essays as a jumping off point. Find the essay that you love the most or a couple of essays that you really love and use that as a model to build your essay off of. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Walker, and the rest of the essays are from his former students, and he's going to talk you through those as well. You're on mute, Mr. Walker.
Again, is being on mute a problem with this? Okay, here we go. So thank you, Ms. Jens. Great job. Those essays are wonderful, and we're going to continue here with some essays that students have written over the years. This first one fits into that prompt about what is it that you know about, what is it that you have done. Now, there are events, there are one-time events that are going to prove to be formative and life-changing, all right, in some modest way or some profound way. Then there's also a recurring event that the writer has gone through over and over again, and from that accumulation of experiences, there is a knowledge about the world that is generated. And this is what this writer wrote. The average person spends 4,560 hours waiting. I've waited around 150,000 already. I sit in a hard chair in the corner and my eyes whip around the room. The blank walls provoke a staring contest with my blinded gaze. I struggle to focus on fluorescent white. A lady flips through an issue of Ladies' Home Journal. Quickly, she turns the pages, not caring when two stick. She's nervous. Mommy, play? Asks a brown-haired boy as he crawls towards a mound of toys. Come back and sit down, Tommy, protests his gum-smacking mother. Her short temper reminds me of my mother's impatience with me, revealing a hint of fear for the person she loves most. Temptation almost lifts me to help him build his blue and red block tower. Waiting here isn't fair. The nervous mother and her boy shouldn't be here. The clock reads 10 till 10. Only 5 minutes have passed. An elderly man walks in, sits alone, beams a kind smile in my direction. My eyes narrow and I grin back. Then the door opens slowly. A familiar face squints. His glasses drop and he looks at me with the same silence as last week. I'm up. So one thing that formed this writer's identity is that she lives with a chronic illness. And so she has she endured throughout her youth and through her teen years multiple doctor's appointments. And so when we talked about what she knew, she wanted to write about this, but she didn't want to write it in a way that was conventional or a way that was going to elicit some kind of sympathy. It was going to be an observational and impactful way of delivering this, and she writes about it in a very efficient and beautiful way, and it's driven by imagery. So and short sentences, and then a final paragraph where there is more telling and more showing, and I think that it's beautifully written. And I'll point you to a couple style things. And when you read these essays, the one question that you're going to go into always when you read is, what am I going to notice, or what do I notice about this essay or about these essays? And when you're reading, you know what, take notes, cut and paste those parts of those essays that you've noticed, that you like, that you might want to imitate, that you might say, you know what, for whatever reason, I might not be able to explain it now, but this appeals to me, and I think I can do this, and I want to try to do this. And again, this took lots and lots of drafts, and this was also written back in a time where this wasn't a common app thing. It was a 250-word limit. However, it's a powerful piece of writing, and there's some writing in here that can guide you into some good choices with style in writing about one of these topics that has to do with illness. All right, so next slide, please. So the next topic here is taking a risk in your writing, and this student did that. Now, I want you to notice before I read, notice the lack of I, of first person pronoun I in this. She is writing about a topic that is external, but she's also writing about a topic that reveals herself. So she's showing and telling, but she's also revealing identity here without using personal pronoun I, first person. Girls stare. They stare at themselves. They stare at each other. They are addicted to their reflections. Girls are surrounded by unforgiving mirrors and shiny objects. Therefore, they are going to look. The looking is inevitable. They continuously scan and search for imperfections, and in their internal dialogues, they curse themselves for not carrying an extra tube of concealer, for not plucking one rogue eyebrow, or for being too young to endure the painful surgeries that will fix a hideously crooked nose. It is hard to walk away from a train wreck. Then moving on deeper into the essay, where she continues to discuss this topic. But it's not our fault. Girls are not to blame for the stereotypical lives we lead. Walt Disney has children chanting, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all," by age 5. By ages 6 and 7, ridiculously proportioned Barbie dolls rule the toy box. And by age 10, every girl has raided her mom's makeup drawer at least once. Clothing and makeup advertisements target 14 to 18-year-old girls, urging them to look as if they are attending the Video Music Awards rather than high school. So you'll see there that there are some references there possibly that date this, but notice what this writer is doing. The audience will know that she is writing not only about herself, but she's also writing about other girls who share in this experience. And she's making a cultural statement at the same time about how body image and identity and perception is formed not only from their own choices, but from cultural influences as well. I also want to point out some style choices that she's making here. In the opening paragraph, there is a series of short sentences, and then she's writing about a very complex and deep topic and the psychological impact of this. And if you'll notice the sentence that says they continuously scan and search for imperfections, you're going to notice parallel structure, they, and then a verb, and then for, and for not, and then for being. And you're also going to see that this very complex idea is written in a long, complex sentence. So it matches, the style matches the structure of this. And again, everyone, this might not come out in a first draft. If it does, congratulations. If it doesn't, this is why you work with another person to write these essays in a how you write it kind of an idea. But you also generate these sentences through repeated writing. So there you go. Next one, please. All right, so what you know, how you write it, and what do you want to reveal? So again, what do you know about in the world? Like, what is it that you know about? That one way to start on these on a topic search is to dig into what you know about the world. Then start to write about that, and then work with style choices along the way. And when you write and you rewrite, you're going to see those, how your style choices reveal your identity, and how you create imagery and use figurative language and make these language choices, whether they're conscious or whether they're kind of in your subconscious, about how they just emerge. And what do you want to show about yourself? All right. And so this is a pretty hilarious way of writing about the idea about being hyper organizational, and just where she, that something that an experience that relates to her identity. So here we go. Notice how she's writing this. All right. It's my drug of choice. Every hour it consumes my thoughts. As with every addiction, there is an enabler. Mine happens to be a place I visit often to score my next hit. Pulling up in front of the building instantly relaxes me. Just the exterior of the building gives a hint of what is to come. A stark, modern, and pure white building with a sign reading the container store in white letters popping off the cobalt blue background. Stepping into the container store, I feel completely in my element. Employees greet customers at the door, sporting shirts that say, "Can you contain yourself?" The answer is no. How can I contain myself when I'm surrounded by 5,000 square feet of organizational paraphernalia? Next one, please. When I walk around the store, it is like a drug addict searching in an alleyway for a fix. I'm enclosed by walls of storage solutions. Lucite boxes, plastic tubs, shoe racks, closet shelving, and magazine racks surround me. Still without my next fix, I slink out of the alley and wander into the surrounding aisles. Going through withdrawal symptoms, my mind fails to focus. My attention constantly switches from wrapping paper to backpacks to measuring spoons to jewelry organizers. Then it hits me. I have already found my drug of choice. Organization gives me the rush that drug addicts achieve after finding their fix. All right, so there are a number of different stylistic aspects here. This is driven by self-effacing humor. This is funny. This is a writer who has perspective on her need to be organized in life. And she's showing that through writing about this with a drug use metaphor and motif, all patterns all the way through this. And she carries it all the way through. So there's a number of stylistic things to comment on here. I'm going to go ahead and continue our discussion about showing and telling. She shows through much of this essay, and then at the end, her telling occurs in two sentences. One is written in, "Then it hits me. I have already found my drug of choice." It's a show and tell. Now she has a choice here. The choice here is to end this essay right now, or if she says, you know what, I need to tell what this is about. I want to make sure my reader understands what this is about. And so she goes ahead and adds a tell sentence on here. Organization gives me the rush that drug addicts achieve after finding their fix. And you can have discussions with your reader and with yourself about whether or not that sentence needs to be there, whether it kind of doesn't, what's the function of it, and then you make the decision. Mrs. Jen said earlier on in this, look, you're going to look back on this, and there still are going to be things you're going to look at that need to be changed, right? But this essay is excellent, and you're going to leave this well enough alone, right? And because your readers are going to appreciate this essay on the whole, and I don't think this one sentence is going to present a problem, right? But it gives the idea of that you have to show what this means to you and why it's important to you, and how your transactions and your experiences in the world connect to you, and then how are you going to express it. All right, so next one, please.
Okay, and before we move to the next one, I always like to comment on this essay too, because I'm an organization freak, so I love this. It is a risk to equate it to a very serious topic of drug addiction. But again, there are risks that a lot of students can take in their essays. One thing I want you to notice about this, and Walker and I both have talked about this in terms of showing versus telling, but it's also about details. It is about getting into the details of what you remember or how you kind of picture something, right? She talks about, she gives this list of lucite boxes, plastic tubs, shoe racks, closet shelving. I feel like I'm in that store with her, which makes me very happy because I love the Container Store as well, right? But you saw that in a similar way in a very different essay when my former student wrote about her brother and the issues that she was having with him. He's standing at the bus stop and she sees the fall leaves around him, and she describes her father's eyes. She describes her brother's face. Details are super important. They are really, really important. I always equate this to like if one of your friends comes in and says, hey, there was a big fight at lunch, and you say, oh my gosh, like, tell me about it. And they go, oh, it was bad. It was really bad. I mean, it was just awful. It was a lot of stuff, I mean, you're going to be very frustrated by that, right? You want the details. You're curious to know, like, what was it like? What did it, and the good storytellers really paint a picture with their words. And that's what we call showing. So I think details are super important. All right. So we'll move on to the next one.
All right, so we go back to this idea of that disease, disaster, divorce, death. Like, how are you going to write about these things, right? And many of you are going to have this in common, and certainly with an emergence of addressing people who live with mental health concerns, it's opened it up, and it's not as much of a stigma to write about. But at the same time, there is how are you going to write about it that is going to reveal your identity, and through your style choices, how are you going to reveal what you've learned about the world? All right. So listen to the way that this writer writes about living in a family that lives with mental health concerns. The lack of encouraging media attention mixed in with my therapist's hesitance that I wouldn't unearth the real issue at hand for my depression made the whole ordeal of obtaining a pill from my brain feel more like a dramatic plot line to boost ratings on Keeping Up with the Kardashians than a reasonable health decision. But despite all my anxieties, I knew one thing. I was sick, and when you're sick, you take medicine. Thus, I followed suit with the rest of my family and got drugged up. That was the best decision I ever made. My body stopped feeling like a cheap paperweight that could barely hold its world in place. I was able to get out of bed in the morning without bawling my eyes out. My smile transformed from post-Botox tight to a girl in a tampon commercial loose, or at least somewhere in between. Next slide. I think about all the people out there silently suffering, and I wish they had a medicine club of their own, someone to buy them decorated pill containers, or at least someone to say, it's okay to ask for help. My medicine shouldn't need to be a secret hidden in the back of my cabinet. There's a way to get better. There's a way to anchor your feet enough to this earth to start remembering all the reasons you want to stay. I don't know if my therapist was right about there being a deeper issue when it comes to mental illness. Insecurities, sure. Closeted rage, maybe. A secret wife in the attic, definitely. But even if there was, I'm confident my family and I wouldn't have gotten through the worst of our illnesses on self-reflection alone. Not when my dad had to pull over because his panic attacks were so bad he couldn't drive. Not when my brother couldn't leave his room for 3 days. Not when I couldn't seem to piece myself together in a school stall. I'm proud to be part of a family who buys you cookie dough ice cream when you finally learn how to swallow a capsule. That is to say, I'm proud to be a part of a family that is open about their flaws, especially the ones they can't control. This is just I love this. This essay is so honest in the way that it's written. But notice that, and what Mrs. Jens talked about with regard to details. If you want to look at details and how writers succeed with details, just sit with a highlighter and choose 2 colors and highlight the action verbs that are in the sentences, and highlight all of the specific and concrete nouns. All right, and you're going to see that there are very few abstract nouns that are going to drive these paragraphs. Sure, they are but that's how they're driven. All right. And that's how you create imagery. That's how you create figurative language. That's how you show, is that it's in the details and it's in the verbs. The other thing I want you to notice in this style idea, and it's very basic, but when you read these essays and you want to approach it with style, notice that most of the sentences begin with the subject and then they are followed by an action verb. That is one key to successful writing. And then when you have that, you move on to sentences like this one in the second to last paragraph, where there's a sequence here of not when, and not when. There are a number of ways that she could write that. You could separate them by commas. You could write them as individual ones. You can use semicolons. This is all choice. This is all identity. And again, it's in the details. And she has, this is the key thing before we move on, she has perspective about these experiences, and she is able to write about it in a way that shows that she is mature and she has grown and she has some command over something that she can't control and she didn't cause. See, that's what when I pull away from this. And the other thing, this is the last thing I'll say about it, is I love the part in here when she says, my medicine shouldn't be a secret. There's a way to anchor your feet. She writes about a therapist. She has so much perspective on it that she herself, in a way, takes on the voice of not only the patient, but now she has the voice of the therapist. This is outstanding. And I also, you're going to get intimidated by these essays because they are polished. But remember, these writers generated these essays through a number of drafts through a recursive writing process with the help of other people. So next slide, please.
Okay, and I'll jump in one more time and just mention something that I find as an English teacher that I kind of love. In the third paragraph on this screen, she's doing something that Walker kind of referred to. Some people call this the rule of three, where you put things in groups of threes, and our brain just kind of likes that. And a lot of times you kind of build. So she talks about insecurities, closeted rage, a secret wife in the attic. And that third one is actually an allusion to a novel called Jane Eyre. And allusions are kind of like inside jokes. You kind of get it or you don't. But your college essay admissions officer, some of them are going to get this kind of little inside joke. The character had a wife hidden in the attic, literally a wife hidden in the attic. So those kind of little things, sometimes they aren't what's going to make or break the essay, but I do like that this writer, she's able to talk about, like Walker said, a very serious topic in a way that shows such maturity and grace and sometimes even humor in that, which I really, really like. All right, here's the next one.
Okay, so finding meaning in the little things. So one thing that you can do, and what I highly recommend, some of you are going to read these prompts and you're going to say, I've got it. I've got the event. I've got this. I can go with this. This is what I'm going to write about. The other way to look at it is pause and then start to walk through your house and look at the things that are still there, the things that you haven't touched for years, or the things that you've collected, the things you know are still meaningful to you, and then start to dig into the meaning in those little things that, and when you say the little things, it means just an object. There's a story. There's stories that live in these things that are in your home, in your room, in your basement, in the part of the garage where you don't go anymore, and all that stuff's been stuffed back there, right? And your mom is like, get this stuff out of here. And some family member is saying, you know what, I can't, because if I throw that out, I'm throwing memories out. I'm that way in my house now because Alex wants to throw out like the baseball stuff, but I've got so many memories in the baseball stuff that I don't coach anymore, but I can't throw them out because I don't want them gone. So this writer looks and says, you know what, I'm going to my Barbie collection. All right. And again, I want to emphasize something else. Your audience for this essay is not your peers, right? Your audience for this essay is college admissions specialists for a number of colleges and universities. You are writing for them. So do not shy away from a subject that you want to write about because you might find that your peers would find that this reveal is going to say something about you that you don't want them to know. Who cares? Write about it anyway. All right. And we've seen multiple subjects so far along the way about that. And let's look at this one. My collection of Barbies was well over 50, always dressed and groomed to the nines. They went to the movies, parties, shopping, and on glamorous vacations, places I only dreamed of going. However, My Barbies were most unfortunate having me as their owner. Their adventures were forever cut short from injuries caused by high heels, sidewalks, and cars, maladies such as headaches, stomach flu, and bronchitis, and action-packed drama with seizures, pregnancies, and the occasional organ transplant. My friend and I fought over who would play Barbie doctor, able to cure any patient that came to Barbie hospital. The bins that housed my Barbies, the few times they were packed away, contained rolls of toilet paper, red magic markers, and old gift boxes that served as casts, blood, and isolation rooms. My aunt, once an ICU nurse and now an NICU nurse, provided the basis of the medical drama that ensued during the adventures of my Barbies with the tales of trauma she related to us over family dinners. My curiosity as a child for practicing medicine that was satiated by Barbie and Ken. And you see where, what's to say about this? Is beautifully written. Again, numbers of 3 in this one sentence here. And you go through here and what do I notice? And what sentence do I come back from? Now, I always come back to their adventures wherever cut short from injuries caused by. That sentence, I don't know how many drafts it took to write that sentence, but it is near perfect. Like that sentence is incredibly well written. And it's generated, it's the one that drives this paragraph, and you land on a sentence like that, you just say, wow. The rest of it is very, very good. And of course, you notice the structure of the paragraph moves from this discussion of Barbies, how she played with them when they were a kid. She had a friend, it was imagination, and then narrowing it into a very purposeful direction that she likes practicing medicine. I had a family connection to medicine through my aunt, and it's going to lead into, you know what, my desire to become a practitioner in the medical field comes from this. And notice how she shows that through her Barbies, right? That's the how you write it. I want to become a nurse. I want to become a doctor. Well, how are you going to write about that and convey that to your audience? It comes through a Barbie collection. All right, next one.
All right, and we're running a little short on time, so I'm actually going to skip one essay and go straight to the end, which is the cake essay, which we like to end with, and you guys will see why.
All right, so this is hilarious, and I'm just going to read this and go with it. All right, my first cake killed my grandmother. I can recall it like it was yesterday, with its orange and yellow assorted sprinkles, delicate whipped cream, and fluorescent pink strawberry frosting. I wanted to spend hours just looking at the butter churn and flip along the sides of the mixer. However, my mom eventually became impatient, so we carried on with the recipe. She was teaching me how to construct my first masterpiece. I put hours of work into that 1 hour quick make cake. I would just keep reapplying frosting and making sure that not one speck of cake was showing. Persistent I was, examining my work of art and working it into perfection. My grandmother liked her sprinkles to be the same distance apart and evenly distributed. This is a killer cake, my mom said, and then she drove me over to hand deliver it. I suppose my mother was right, because my grandmother was found dead the next morning. Talk about a buzzkill for an 82nd birthday. Family members tried to comfort me by blaming it on her chain smoking, age, or her high blood pressure due to yelling her head off like the lead singer of a heavy metal band, or at random cats that ran across her lawn. Somehow she thought even with a walker she could catch a 4 quick-legged animal. At the age of 9, I had a different theory. Maybe she had the midnight munchies. I guess I had applied too much frosting. All right, hilarious. And if you want to be funny, and you can be funny, and you want to write about something that has to do with the death of a loved one in a hilarious way, go for it, because this is hilarious. And what else can I say? All right.
Okay, so that will pretty much conclude our presentation. We hope, again, that you are inspired by some of these writers Again, try not to be intimidated by them. These are students who have worked very hard on their essays, who really put in the time and the effort. Their first drafts often looked nothing like this. In fact, some students will come to me with a first draft and we will pull out 2 sentences of that draft and turn it into something completely different. So reach out to your English teachers, people that you trust, people that you know who enjoy writing, who appreciate good writing. And they will give you feedback and help, but you need to bring them something. Bring them something that you're thinking about or that you've written that you're kind of mulling over in your head. I will show you one quick thing as we wrap up here. When you go to the Potomac Falls website, you will see this packet, and a lot of it is what we have talked about today, with some additional choosing a topic that we've kind of touched on a little bit. And then you have a letter from the Office of Admissions from UVA that is very good. It kind of breaks it down into what is the good, the bad, the risky. And then you have those links. This is more UVA essays that are really good to look at, Johns Hopkins, Hamilton, and then the ones that we've shared with you today that are former Potomac Falls students. And these are the essays in their entirety. So today we shared with you excerpts of those essays. We would encourage you to go to this packet and take a look and find the one that you feel like really kind of speaks to you the most. And again, you will get to that by going to the Potomac Falls website and scrolling down to where it says news from our school and then clicking on that. All right. Any other words as we wrap up, guys?
So, just remember, it's about telling your audience something important and saying it in a way that is that matches your style choices and explaining your growth and your maturity and what new things you know about the world from having had those experiences.
And I hope that you all take your time and look at this presentation several times. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you, Ms. Jens. You're the best, and we are so grateful to have you help us through this process. And seniors, can't wait to work with you. I'm excited. It's going to be a good year. We'll be okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.